I'm Navasero from Babs 31. So, i-discuss ko ngayon sa inyo yung Summit Diplomacy. Ito yung international meetings of state or government, political leaders, and highly representatives of international organization. Yung some meetings of international importance na tinutukoy kabilang sa summit, included dito yung World Health Organization, tsaka yung finance minister ng iba't ibang estado. Then, pero yung foreign minister na sinasabi ay hindi na siya referred to as summit. Pero needed pa din siya na sumali sa mga gatherings. Tapos, yung international summit ay most common expression na siya for global governance. Also, yung summit naman, wala pa siyang diplomatic and political meaning until na si Winston Churchill inintroduce niya to sa international parlance. No, it was in 1950, 4 years after he employed the now immortal metaphor of the Iron Curtain to refer to the frontier between capitalism and communism in Europe. The Britain's former war hero started calling meetings between the leaders of the great powers, which is summit meetings. So, ayun. Proceed tayo sa advantages ng summit diplomacy. So, yung advantage ng summit diplomacy naman ay, hindi mo na kailangan hanap ng tao to represent you, which is the leader and participant also, ikaw na din yung chief policymaker na involved doon sa mismong diplomacy directly. So, yun yung advantage niya.
There are different types of summit pero mahirap ma-discover yung meaning generalization dahil nagkakaroon dito ng face-to-face or private conversation ay elite leaders during Second World War and the Global Summit at the beginning of 21st century. Meron pa ako sinama dito, eto sinulat ko na nagkaroon ng agreement ng Atlantic Charter at saka Yalta Conference in 1945 between the leaders of the Allies concerning the life and order after the war and the goals for peace. Tapos, included din dito yung territorial agreements tsaka trade agreements ay contractual arrangement between state at concern nila sa trade relationship.
Then, yung sa Atlantic Charter, sinasabi niya na yung United States daw ay supported sa British in the war. Both of them ay pinapresent nila yung unity regarding their mutual principles and hopes for a peaceful post-war world and the policies that they agreed to follow once the German had been defeated. Tapos din naman sa Yalta Conference ay nagkaroon ng meeting of 3 World War II allies, which is ito yung sa US President na si Franklin D. Roosevelt, British Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin. Sila yung tatlo na nagkakilala noong February 1945 sa resort city of Yalta. Located to along the Black Sea coast of the Crimean Peninsula. So, dito naman, yung naging meeting nila or pinag-usapan nila dito yung post-war fate of defeated Germany and the rest about sa Europe, the term Soviet entry into the ongoing war in the Pacific against Japan and the formation and operation of the new United Nations.
So, isa sa example ng summit diplomacy na nakuha ko ay yung kay President Woodrow Wilson. Siya ay personally nag-participate sa Paris Peace Conference noong 1919. American President was asserting the right to be present at negotiations affecting his nation and the world future security to deal directly with his foreign counterpart. Sabi daw, yung meeting na to ay para sa para magsettle ng peace terms would be conducted by the principal political leaders doon sa mga karatig na lalawigan nila o mga lugar para daw sa pagpapatuloy ng wartime diplomatic experience.
To go forward on the said topic of summit diplomacy, I am tasked to give a specific example. So I can give you one specific summit, which is the ASEAN Summit. This was occurred when was the Cold War happened back in 1967, particularly in the Vietnam. So the war rapidly escalated through the region. So the leaders of the Southeast Asian nations gathered through an assembly for them to talk about how to promote political and economic stability within the region. So the first 5 members was the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. And then it was developed through years in 1984, Brunei Darussalam, and 1995, Vietnam, 1997 in the Laos and the Myanmar, while in 1999, Cambodia joined. So, as the years passed, members had been multiply. So, we had also called ASEAN plus 3. So, ASEAN plus 3 are the members, which I was mentioned the 10 nations earlier, plus 3 within the China, Japan, and South Korea's membership. So the last ASEAN occurred was the 2017 ASEAN, which was held in the Philippines, which is the chairperson is our president, which is Mr. Rodrigo Duterte. So this was happened on April 28 to 29 to November 10 to 14. So that's all, and thank you.
When the two state leaders, either the head of the state or the head of government, meet and get engaged in a conversation, the two leaders is doing personal diplomacy. When we say personal diplomacy, it is purely personal. Sila mismo ang nagta-travel sa ibang countries para makipag-negotiate sa isang or sa ibang head of the state. Sila mismo, hindi sila nagpapadala ng ambassador, ng mga diplomats para makipag-engage doon sa isang head of the state. Sila mismo ang pumupunta at nakikipag-negotiate. Interaction happen between the two leaders. There are symbolized friendship between the two countries. Hence, it is a form of diplomacy.
So for the other definition of personal diplomacy is an activity of diplomatic kind conducted by someone who is not a diplomatic agent and may be acting without formal authorization or even encouragement, but whose personal standing ensures that he or she will be heard. A head of state without executive power may engage in such activity. From the above definition of personal diplomacy, it can be inferred that personal diplomacy is conducted by those outside the sphere of public office. Even though there is a lack of official state backing, they exert power and positively engage to bridge relationship with other states. But honestly speaking, it was affirmed by Mr. Berridge and Alan James that there is no precise meaning as to what is meant by personal diplomacy, as different literatures define personal diplomacy from different perspectives. However, it is important to note here that the personal relationship of the actual persons involved in the diplomatic activity is the key essence of personal diplomacy. Thank you.
Example ng personal diplomacy ay si President Franklin Roosevelt and si Harry Hopkins. So, si President Roosevelt ay known as the FDR. Siya yung 32nd President of the United States. during 1933 hanggang 1945. At siya yung natatanging president na 4 times na elect sa kanila. And he led US through the two crises. Ito yung Great Depression and the World War II. He greatly expanded the powers of the federal government para makagawa ng projects and reform na tinatawag nilang New Deal. So sa New Deal, ito ay ginagawa nila domestically for immediate economic assistance or relief. And yung reforms nila ay para sa industry, agriculture, labor, finance, housing, and water power. And during the New Deal, parang naging trusted confidant niya si Harry Hopkins. And Harry Hopkins acted as a personal manager and political advisor ni President Roosevelt. During the World War II, he made trips for the president. So, pumupunta siya ng London and Moscow to discuss about military strategies and assistance. Naging emissary siya ni President Roosevelt or siya yung pinapadala sa ibang bansa for a certain mission. And naging liaison siya ni President Roosevelt. Siya yung nag-a-act or nag-aasikaso, nagbibigay assistance para sa interaction between different parties. And naging liaison siya ni President Roosevelt between sa Prime Minister ng United Kingdom na si Winston Churchill and between the Premier of the Soviet Union na si Joseph Stalin.
Okay, so given na yung personal diplomacy ay isang taktika kung saan yung mga leader ng isang bansa o estado ay sila-sila na mismo yung nakikita at nag-uusap para isulong yung kanilang pansariling interes, nandito ako para magbigay ng ilang examples. Isang bansang United States of America sa may pinakamaraming political leaders o presidents na gumagamit ng personal diplomacy. Isa sa mga pinakakilala natin ay si President Donald Trump. Ilang beses na natin siyang nakitang nakikipag-usap sa leader ng iba't ibang bansa nang hindi masyadong gumagamit ng ambassadors para isulong yung kanyang interes para sa Amerika. So, Trump is an example of a leader to put his faith on leader-to-leader relations. Naniniwala siya na kapag nakipag-friends ka sa leader ng ibang bansa, mas madali mong makukuha yung gusto mo. Kaya makailang beses natin siya nakita nakipag-usap kay, say for example, North Korean President Kim Jong-un, kay Poland's right-wing President Andrzej Duda, and kay Chinese President Mr. Xi Jinping. Sabi ko nga, kung titingnan natin, hindi lang si Donald Trump yung US President na gumamit ng personal diplomacy bilang tactic. Nandyan din si ex-President Ronald Reagan and ex-President George Bush na nakipagkaibigan kay Soviet Union leader Mikhail Gorbachev para siguraduhin na yung magiging pagtatapos ng Cold War ay magiging smooth para sa magkabilang panig ng Soviet Union at ng US. Isa pang halimbawa ay si Mr. Barack Obama na naniwalang yung kanyang humble beginnings, yung pagsisimula niya sa isang ethnic minority ay pwedeng maging susi para mas maayos niya yung lumalalang sitwasyon at relasyon ng US sa Islamic world. So those are my examples.
Hello everyone, I am Nicole. And to further understand what is summit diplomacy and personal diplomacy, me and my partner Nisha will give you some differences between these two. First, in a usual setup of a personal diplomacy, the head of the state or the president prefers to visit another state to meet their leaders himself rather than sending ambassadors, representatives, or other government officials. Meanwhile, in a summit diplomacy, a lot of leaders are involved, not just the head of the state but also the foreign ministers, heads of the government, and representatives. Next, usually in a personal diplomacy, when two leaders meet and got engaged to a conversation, they are already building a diplomacy, or it is already showing personal diplomacy. But on the other hand, it takes a lot of time and scheduling to prepare for a summit because, as I said, it includes a lot of people, Next is that even though the topics of the leaders are all about the national interest, the politics, and anything related to their states that they are representing, when it comes to personal diplomacy, it shows a little informality. Why? Because in a way, their interaction that is happening between the two is more relaxed and showing more friendship side than political. Meanwhile, in a summit diplomacy, it includes a wide range of communications between the states involved, including their plans, their engagements, their restrictions, their international relations, and other plans for the future. In short, it is in need to be formal interactions rather than informal, just like the personal diplomacy. Next is the personal diplomacy is a really good tactics for international relations, and it has been a long run presidential partnership. I'm gonna give you an example. When President Trump visited North Korea to meet their president, Mr. Kim Jong-un, meaning President Trump knows who are the presidents that is somehow powerful enough to talk about his personal endeavors. Trump used personal diplomacy to or in continuation of the past presidential practices. While in a summit diplomacy, it has been a central element of international diplomacy since the second half of the 20th century. The examples of summits are assemblies that is happening in European Union and ASEAN. Okay, that's all my differences. I hope you understand it well, and Nisha will continue the other differences of summits and diplomacy. Thank you.
My group mates have already explained the summit diplomacy and personal diplomacy, and they have already given example to make it easier to understand. Maaaring sa pagpapaliwanag nila nito ay nabanggit na nila yung maaaring pinagkaiba ng dalawa, ngunit nandito ako para ibahagi kung ano yung pinagkaiba nila sa madaling salita. So when we say personal diplomacy, it is two state leaders meet and got engaged into a conversation. And when we say summit diplomacy, it is a type of conference diplomacy used by international government in which the heads of state meet for face-to-face negotiation. So yung pinakasimpleng pinakaiba nila is kapag personal ay between two people at sa summit naman is between two or more people. Katulad na lang sa ASEAN.